Welcome to my next video. In this video, we will be talking about your emergency fund. What is an emergency fund? Why do I need an emergency fund? Well, an emergency fund is cash or ready access to cash to deal with life's emergencies. What kind of emergencies? Things like you lose your job, your car blows up, you have very big unanticipated bills. These are all examples of emergencies. If you have cash in an emergency fund, or if you have ready access to cash, you can deal with these emergencies. If you don't, you risk being financially wiped out. Now, why do you need an emergency fund? Well, what are the alternatives? You can rely on good luck. You can rely on divine intervention. Or you can rely on an emergency fund. In my opinion, it's better to have an emergency fund and to rely on that. If you've not already done so, I highly recommend that you set up an emergency fund as soon as possible. It is important for your money life. How much should I have in an emergency fund? Well, there's a traditional rule of thumb you may have heard about that says you should have 6 months of your wages in an emergency fund. Why? Where'd they come up with that? Well, traditionally where they came up with that was that for most of us, the big financial emergency was losing your job. And if you lost your job, you would have to figure out a way to pay for your lifestyle costs until you found a new job. And traditionally, the thought was your lifestyle costs were about equal to your wages. And traditionally, the thought was it would take you about 6 months to find a new job. So that's where we came up with this traditional rule of thumb that said an emergency fund should be 6 months of your wages. So, should you just automatically have your emergency fund be 6 months of your wages? No, absolutely not. I highly recommend you look at your situation and your life to decide how much you should have in your emergency fund. For example, what are your job skills? What's the job market like? Are there other sources of income in your world if you lose your job? These are all things you need to consider to decide how much should be in your emergency fund. The goal of an emergency fund is to have cash in an emergency. If you have cash set aside, that's great, but there are alternatives to having cash set aside. You can live on your credit cards for a while. You can borrow money from a bank or friends or family members. You can sell property investments. You can even do other things. As long as you have a way to raise cash, you're fine. Where do you keep your emergency fund? Well, you don't know when an emergency is going to happen. Your emergency fund should be invested in cash, not stocks or bonds. Stocks or bonds may be great places to invest longer term, like say for your retirement. But for an emergency fund, it should only be invested in cash type of investments. Things like a money market fund, a bank account. That's where your emergency fund should be. You don't know when you're going to need your emergency fund. So it should be in some place that is safe, stable in value, and available to you on short notice. That's where your emergency fund should be. If you got something from this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. Be sure to check out my other videos and playlists. What I said in this video is my opinion based upon my education, my life experiences, and my set of values. and is for typical people in typical situations. It is not for all people in all situations. Until the next video, always remember that you are the best person in the world to decide how to live your life.